Welcome to the GOTO podcast. Each episode covers the brightest and boldest ideas from the world's leading experts in software development. Tune in for practical lessons, compelling theories, and plenty of inspiration. GOTO gathers the brightest minds in the software community to help developers tackle projects today, plan for tomorrow, and create a better future. Stay up to date with the latest in tech through GOTO's top-rated events held online and in person in cities like Amsterdam, London, Copenhagen, and Chicago, and by subscribing to the GOTO Conference's YouTube channel, where you can find thousands more high-quality dev talks. Learn more at gotopia.tech.
Welcome to GOTO Unscripted. I'm really delighted and honored to be here with Jez Humble, who I've never had the chance to interview before. So I'm a bit excited and a little bit fanish. But maybe you could start by telling us sort of what you're doing.
Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be interviewed. So I'm working at Google as a site reliability engineer. Been doing that for about 2.5 years now. Finally feel like I kind of understand how the serverless platform works a bit, and don't panic when I get paged, so that's nice. Before that, I've done a multitude of things, but probably I think what people know me for is having written some books about software and continuous delivery and so forth.
Yeah, I think the sort of, people know you for Accelerate, and I think it's sort of quite interesting and maybe slightly surprising to people that you might be doing something that's not just rehashing Accelerate over and over again, and that you've actually gone and you've learned something new. And how did that feel to go from being the sort of, the Jez Humble of Accelerate to the Jez Humble who doesn't really understand SRE?
I think my problem is I'm easily bored. And I have a short attention span. And so when I feel like I've really got to grips with something and I get very comfortable with it, I start to look around and find something else to do that I don't know anything about. And so that's really what happened. I got to Google and I was in DevRel for a couple of years when I joined. Mainly because it meant I get to work from home and hang out with my family, and that was great. But then COVID came along, and then I could work from home being an SRE. So I thought I could try that and give that a try. And it's been great. It's been cool. But I think, the thing about Accelerate is that, both Nicole and I had been working on that since 2014. So we've been doing it for, 5 years by the point we joined Google. And I think both of us, very happy and surprised that Accelerate has been so well received. And in fact, Google, they're continuing to work on the research program. The State of DevOps report for 2023 is currently open. You can go and take the survey for that. There's an amazing team working on that, still providing assessments to Google Cloud customers. We've got amazing resources at dora.dev. You can go and take a quick check and read about all the different capabilities. So that work continues. But I think both Nicole and I, by 2019, felt like we wanted to take a break. And she's off at Microsoft doing research, and I'm at Google doing SRE.
Yeah, when we were sort of first thinking about having this conversation, and then I was thinking, okay, well, what do I want to ask you? And the list in my head was Accelerate, Accelerate. And then I thought about it, and I thought, actually, it must get quite old for you of just sort of everybody coming up to you and going, Accelerate, Dora metrics, Accelerate. And you ever sort of wish people would talk to you about other things, or are you happy to?
I mean, it's a huge privilege that, it's a great problem to have that people want to talk to me about that. It means that it's been successful and people have paid attention to it. So, I'm not complaining about that at all. I think it's great that people have found value in it. And that's the most you can really hope for as an author, is that people buy a book and then they read it and then they talk about it to other people, and then it becomes widely adopted. So that's great. I think, my worry is that it goes the same way as Agile, of what Martin Fowler calls semantic diffusion, and everyone's doing Accelerate, but not really doing it. And that was always, that was the reason, or one of the main reasons I started on the program in the first place, is because back in the day we were doing continuous integration, and then you kind of everyone's like, oh, I'm doing continuous integration. And then you ask them what they're actually doing, and they're not doing it at all. And
I don't think continuous means what you think continuous means, because your word definition of continuous involves the word 6 months.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's infuriating. So, I've got some hot button things that piss me off, and that's one of them. So, for my own sanity, I kind of disappear into SRE, and I'm like, doing that kind of stuff, because, there's only so many times I can stand up there and, talk about CI and then get wound up by the fact that people, a lot of people still haven't really, I would love it if people didn't just talk about it, but if it just became the way people worked. And then people stopped talking about it because it was just the way people did stuff. That would be ideal for me. And we're not there yet, so there's still work to do. But, I can't do that all the time because,
blood pressure
drive me around the bend.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting insight, though, that the idea that if people are talking about it, then that means that you've got a ways to go, and that you're sort of either you're at the start of the journey, which is okay, or you're doing this sort of very superficial thing where you have all of the words and it doesn't actually translate into any difference in outcomes or behavior or anything like that. Do you think, now this is sort of I hesitate to ask this question because it's just so existential and bleak, but we've sort of seen this trend over and over again of this kind of superficial, thoughtless adoption of things. So, you have the sort of we're doing agile. Well, I'm not really sure you are. And we have a CI. I'm not really sure you do, because I think it's a verb, not a noun. And it just sort of seems to happen over and over again. And do you think that's sort of just necessary and hopeless, and no matter how good an idea is, it becomes sort of, corrupted and devalued? Or do you think we are going in the right direction, even though we have these personal frustrations? Is there hope for humanity?
Tough one. I really feel like, and this is true just more widely in the world, I think, things go backwards as well as forwards. And definitely there's a lot of that at the moment in the wider world. And I think, it's the same in software. Software is so driven by trends. It's so fashion driven. And that's, something that's become increasingly obvious is that, software people like to think of themselves as super rational and kind of like these very kind of abstract beings. And software is not like that at all. It's just wildly fashion driven. And so there is a certain cognitive dissonance in this stuff being very popular to talk about, and you still go and poke around at what's on the ground, and what's on the ground is very different. But I think that's always been the case. I remember doing the research for the Lean Enterprise book. There's a book by McGregor called The Human Side of Enterprise, which was written in 1960, talking about theory X and theory Y, and how theory X is about carrot and stick rewards, and theory Y is about intrinsic motivation, and how managers approach motivating people, and the behavior that you get depends on how you treat people. And here we are in 2023 and people still haven't learned that. And so that's 60 plus years old by this point. So, I think, all right, if I was going to get really existential about this, I would start talking about capitalism and how capitalism creates these reward structures which create these kind of intrinsic motivations. And that's the reason why we see a lot of the things that we do, which I think is true. But if I was going to be a bit less ranty, I would say, a lot of this is about developing good habits that help you achieve long-term goals. And so many of our incentive structures are short-term. And so much of it, especially as a developer, is about, developers are very good at following incentive structures. And so often the incentive structure is just to get the code in as quickly as possible and to sit on your own and kind of do stuff. Talking to people is difficult. Communication is difficult. It's an overhead. It's not what engineers are trained to do. And I think
a lot of us became engineers specifically to avoid having to talk to people.
Right, that's right. And actually, that's a huge problem. And it goes in, Varsha's over there in the background. We were talking about, stereotypes and women in tech. And a lot of these things feed into each other. This stereotype we've created, that it's kind of an activity by people sitting in rooms on their own with like wearing hoodies and doing all this. And software engineering is fundamentally a social activity. And that's, I know I'm preaching to the choir.
It's not just at me, though. It's at me and however many thousand of our closest friends.
Right.
So preach away.
And so I think a lot of what we're trying to do with CI and Accelerate is actually talk about teamwork and how to build high-performing teams. And we're very specific in the book about that, about how it's about building high-performing teams. And so much of that is about behavior and communication and reward structures and leadership and effective leadership. And leadership is not about the executives. Leadership is about everyone and everyone on the team trying to help grow the team and grow the capabilities of the team. And so I still think the reason there's not so much focus on that is just because these stereotypes still persist and they're perpetuated by a lot of the existing people in tech and in society more widely.
I have another theory about the fashion aspect of it, actually, which is slightly less depressing, so you may enjoy. Because I think you're 100% right. It is so fashion-driven, and we see this so much at the moment. I mean, we saw it with Agile, and we see it with microservices now. And one of our consultants used to get really frustrated because he'd sort of go and talk to a client, and they'd say, we want to do microservices. And he would say, why do you want to do microservices? And they would say, Netflix. And they'd say, okay, well, yeah, but what problem are you trying to solve? Netflix. No, but, and then, the conversation would, he knew he'd be in trouble because they weren't talking about decoupling or, anything like that. But I think all of us, we want to do the right thing and we want to become better. And the way that we do that is by looking to the people that we perceive to be doing things in the best way, which in the case of Netflix or microservices certainly was Netflix. And because we all have too much to do and too much cognitive load, and because we're lazy, but I'm trying to be optimistic, so we'll say because we have competing demands, you do take those mental shortcuts, which means that you copy the superficials of, hey, maybe I can make my application distributed, rather than the more fundamental things of, hey, maybe I could decouple my application, because it's harder. And people aren't very good at doing hard things, but that's because we have lots to do and we're prioritizing in a way that's not always wise, but is coming from a positive place of aiming to improve and prioritizing unwisely.
Yeah, no, I think that's right.
Have I cheered you up yet?
I mean, the problem is, I agree with that. But I think, then you're relying on people to create systems that encourage the right behavior.
Yeah.
And I just don't see enough of that, I guess.
Yeah.
And so that's optimistic if you imagine that people are going to create capacity to then do the right thing.
Yeah.
And I guess that's what worries me, is that I don't see enough of that. Yeah,
I was used to get really depressed when I'd get asked, how do we persuade our management to let us refactor? And I used to think you shouldn't have to persuade your management to refactor. You should just do it all of the time continuously, and things should be getting better and you should be being rewarded for that.
Yeah.
And if either of those two conditions aren't there, then something deeper is wrong. Then I don't know the right argument to persuade my management to refactor.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think, what I tell people is don't tell your managers, don't ask permission. And this is the same with testing. Like, how do we get permission to do testing? I'm like, you don't. I mean, when you take your car to the garage to get your car fixed, does the person in the garage say, oh, well, you'll pay this up? This is the charge to get your car fixed, and then this is the extra charge to make sure it works after I fixed it. Like that's not how it works. Right? You pay it and they check that it works as part of doing the work. So,
Although, going back to incentive structures and systems again, that if garages did offer that 2-tier pricing, quite a lot of people would quite happily take the
cheapest option.
Yeah, it's cheaper, I'll take it. And then be really aggravated that the car doesn't work and think it's the fault of the garage.
Right, no, that's true. That's true. You'll always find a way to blame someone.
Yeah, so you have to bake it into the system so that
So you need to get better at that. And again, that's about, human stuff. And and I think a lot of software engineers are rule followers and don't want to get into trouble.
Yeah. And we were talking before about systems, and one of the things that some systems I think probably are more easy to shape into the right direction, and some systems have constraints that make it more challenging. And sometimes they're real, and sometimes I think they're superficial or apparent. So you mentioned lean enterprise, and when I would speak about process things, one of the questions that I got every single time was, we'd like to be quite cool, but we're a regulated industry, so we can't do anything good. And then I used to say, have you read Lean Enterprise? And the answer would be no, and I would then sort of give half an answer, but end by saying, go read Lean Enterprise, because one of the things that you show in there is that these rules that are used as an excuse often actually don't prevent the good behaviors, and really in a regulated industry of all industries, you should be testing and you should have the rigor and you should have the auditing and that kind of thing. So can you talk a bit more about what you've seen in regulated industries?
Yeah, I mean, exactly as you say. The things that we talk about in continuous delivery and extreme programming, those are even more important. People seem to have this idea that agile and extreme programming is about being a cowboy and cutting corners. Right, exactly. And that's not it. You're actually being much more careful and much more rigorous about the way that you do your work, and making sure that you're building quality in. That's one of the key concepts in lean engineering as well as extreme programming. And so, yes, as you say, it's even more important in that situation to be doing the right thing. So,
we're in a regulated industry, so we really want to do the wrong thing.
Right. So you don't want to do testing and continuous integration. That's an interesting choice. So that's exactly right. And I think a lot of the time, what they're actually saying is we can't change the way we work, because if we change the way we work, then someone's going to come and slap us on the wrist. And I think that fear is real. It can happen anywhere. It can happen in startups, and it's just a function of the fact that any successful organization, and again, this is not me. This is I'm totally blanking on the name of Shine's book, Corporate Culture Survival Guides. He talks about the fact that successful companies are successful because of the way they worked. So if you're trying to change the way some successful team works, you're basically saying, well, the things you're doing that made you successful are the wrong things to be doing, and now you need to change it, to which the obvious response is, but why? And I think that's really what's kind of going on in a lot of places, and the fact that there's a cost to changing the way you work, and the auditors might well come in and be like, well, what are you doing here? And so that's real. And I think the response to that is, it's all in your mind. Firstly, to challenge yourself always to think, what if the way I'm working is not the best way that it's possible to work, and there is a way to improve? And so there is a mental thing that you have to always be thinking, how can I get better? And that's something that, I don't know, probably for psychological reasons to do with my childhood, I've always kind of had in the back of my mind. Also, I think the thing that still surprises me is the extent to which the industry is really segregated into, people can work a certain way. So, for example, the question I always used to ask for trunk-based development is, do you do trunk-based development, or do you work on branches? And I obviously go and tell everyone about continuous integration and merging into trunk all the time. And there was two responses to that. It was very, very binary. People would either say, oh, obviously, or they would say, that's completely impossible. What are you talking about? And, you really find a lot of people who've worked a particular way, and they find it inconceivable that you could work any other way, or that people over here are doing something different. And that's shockingly common, I think. So I think that's another kind of mental thing that people have got to overcome, that, the way I've been working all my life. And that's scary, right? If you've been working a certain way all your life and you've been successful, and someone's coming along and telling you that actually there's problems with that, you take that as like a personal insult almost, or at least a challenge. So there's a lot of that, I think. But again, most of these problems, someone actually said this, and I can't remember who it was, unfortunately, but they said that a lot of extreme programming was about getting people to talk to each other more. And it was about overcoming a lot of these stereotypes about software engineering. So, continuous integration and testing. A lot of these things are about, and extreme planning and, cards and all this kind of thing is about encouraging conversations. And so if you actually go and talk to auditors at regulated companies, often you can have really good conversations. And I remember I've done this on multiple occasions, gone to banks and talked to the developers and like, oh, we can't do this because the auditors will hate it. And then you go and talk to the auditors and they're like, oh, that sounds really cool. How can we get in on that? And it's just because they're not talking to each other. So that was always my biggest hack with DevOps, is like, how do you implement DevOps? Find the people who you think are going to say no to you and go and take them out for lunch. find out what's motivating them and what they care about and have a conversation. And normally you'll find actually you've got a lot in common.
How do you balance? Because I see two sort of trends in tech talks and tech writing. One is we need to talk to each other more, and these problems that seem like technical problems are actually problems caused by not talking to each other. And the other one is we need to talk to each other less because we're not getting anything done because we have this enormous communication overhead. How do you reconcile those? That's
an excellent point. A very good question. And I think, the standard spiel on this is about Conway's Law and about, and I think, I think the crucial insight is you've got limited communication bandwidth. How do you use it wisely? And how do we use it to talk about the right things instead of the wrong things? And so the right things are the information that you need in order to get it right in the first place. And the wrong things are like detailed planning across teams to find out stuff that is actually an artifact of the fact that you've organized your APIs and your teams wrongly. So that's what it is. It's like, yes, the bandwidth is limited. How do we use it for the right things? And a big piece of it is like, well, you've got to get the team structure and the architecture right so that you can use that bandwidth to be, focused on strategic issues rather than tactical issues fundamentally.
And I guess as well, then there's sort of the don't waste time communicating about things that could actually be done by an automated process. So instead of having a conversation about the status, let's have the status be automated. Instead of having a conversation about the current implementation of the API, let's have somewhere where we can look it up and actually just use it. And there's probably loads more examples like that.
Yeah, I mean, that makes me just think about the importance of good platforms. So one of the things that I found really cool about joining Google was, so we had all this stuff from all this material in DevOps research that Nicole and I had built. And we wanted to stand up the website on Google infrastructure. And in a lot of companies, you would need to go and talk to someone and, go through a whole process. And actually what I discovered at Google, it was just scarily easy that you could just create, I literally just created a directory, created a mapping to the Google front end to stand up the website, pushed all the code. And I just needed to send change requests to people. And then they would look at it and be like, yeah, that looks fine. And I didn't need to talk to anyone. I could just stand up this website and, do it all with just pull requests to people. And there was a standard process and it just worked. And so much of Google, you can just get stuff done with a change request without having to talk to anyone. And I think that's exactly to your point. We built a platform at Google where anyone, you can't directly change anything, but you can certainly send a pull request to anyone. Anyone can do that. You can find all the code, you can send change requests and you can get stuff done that way. And it's wildly efficient.
And you get the audit trail as well.
Absolutely. You get all those things you want from compliance, which is the segregation of duties and all that stuff. It's all for free.
Nice. And I mentioned, that there's these environments where it seems like things make it harder to, it seems like the system makes it harder to do the right thing, but it's actually not because, you're in a regulated industry. It should be easier to do the right thing. But then I think there's other ones where actually maybe we don't know the answer yet. And there are ways that we would like to work and other constraints that we have. And where I'm going with this in particular is the relationship between extreme programming and open source, because both of those are just the best thing since sliced bread. But one's a round piece of bread and one's a square piece of bread. I sometimes find that the reliance on pull requests in open source is really necessary in order to enable an asynchronous way of working, because no one who is maintaining an open source platform wants to be rung at 2 a.m. by someone saying, "Hey, buddy, I've got an idea. Can we do some pair programming?" No, it's 2 a.m. I had other priorities. But on the other hand, pair programming solves so many problems, and it's so nice that. What's your solution?
I wouldn't say I had a solution, but I think my analysis of it is that, again, fundamentally, we're looking at technical mechanisms as a proxy for actual human behavior, such as trust. So the reason that you want pull requests if you're maintaining an open source project is because you don't want just any old person committing to your repo because you don't trust them, quite reasonably. And if you're, I don't know, probably someone will contradict me on this, but if I've been working with someone a long time and I know how they work and I know the kind of their risk tolerance and their way of working, then it's much quicker for me to be able to review their change requests and see what they're doing, because I've got so much context on the way that they work and the kind of work that they do. And so you will treat different people differently. And obviously, also, if you've been working in open source for a long time, you know better than to send 6 months of full-time work as a change request to someone and expect to get it committed. And I used to lurk on the Linux kernel mailing list back in the day quite a lot, and you'd see all the time people would submit a change request, and someone would say, or send a patch in those days, as he called it, and someone would say, take that, break it into 8 different bits and submit them all separately, because otherwise, how are you supposed to understand what's going on there? I mean, you can't just look at a huge change request and visually understand what's going on. So the answer is to break that up into small bits so you can understand each one independently and evaluate that. And that's exactly what continuous integration is. It's breaking it up into small bits and then integrating them regularly. So exactly the same forces fundamentally apply in both scenarios, I think. And it's all about working incrementally and iteratively and understanding what you're doing and working in this context of complex systems where small, apparently simple changes can cause unexpected side effects, and building systems around managing the risks of those changes. So, I mean, fundamentally the same forces apply. It's just that we're going to apply different techniques in order to manage those different risks. And, certainly, for me, my happiest times were working in a co-located team, pair programming, and it was so efficient and you got so much work done. And I understand that, that's not possible anymore and there's disadvantages to that and not everyone can work that way, and that's fine. But you've got to change the way you work based on, what's appropriate for your team and the wider problem you're solving.
Yeah, I think there's such a tension between the joy of working in a co-located team and pair programming and the joy of working with a distributed team where you have the choice of people who are anywhere in the world and you can work in your pajamas from anywhere in the world as well. And again, both of those are so good, but they just aren't compatible.
Right. Yeah, no, it is very cool. You're right. I mean, there's joy to be found in both ways of working.
I find, because I used to work in an office and now I work at home, and I got so much work done on the train that I don't get done anymore.
Oh, right.
So even though I don't really miss the commute, I think I miss that kind of decompression structure that existed at the beginning and end of the day.
Yeah, it's really nice. I mean, and then you get to decompress a bit. And when you're at home, you can be in that headspace a lot more, whereas the transition when you're working from home can be a lot more jarring.
Mm-hmm. So when we were talking about the sort of the response to Accelerate and some of the frustrations that you had, do you have any other complaints and rants that you'd like to share? Because this is the perfect opportunity to just complain.
To rant about stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, we were having a little chat before this.
We were.
about how when you get that big pull request, the only thing you can really do, apart from send it back and get them to send it in smaller bits, is complain about the formatting and how that shouldn't even be a thing in the first place. And I'm going to, talk again annoyingly and smugly about Google's toolchain and about how, the first thing that happens when you send a pull request in is it runs the linter against it and fails the build if the linter says that your code is not formatted properly, and how they've got this really nice tool chain where you can just type, G4 fix, and it'll run the linter on all the files and lint them correctly. So it's just never a problem. And if it is a problem, it's an immediate facepalm. Like the CI system's just like, run G4 fix.
Yeah, I think you can get these pockets of fixedness, but it does really frustrate me that in our industry as a whole, and it's 2023, and I've been saying this every year for the last 15 years, we still haven't fixed this. And, we have the isolated bits, but I never really got on with Go as a language. But the one thing that I thought was amazing in Go was the Go format, to just say, I don't care about your opinions about tabs versus spaces. Mm-hmm. This is the format, sort it out. Whereas in the Java ecosystem that I'm in now, well, in fact, in general, I think, we still don't even have a rich cross-IDE formatting specification, and it's 2023, so I still get comments on the formatting in my pull requests, and every time I do, I just lose the will slightly, because I think, we can send people to the moon, and we've been doing that for 60 years, and, the problems that we can solve now are so complex And yet the problem of getting people to agree on tabs versus spaces and encode it in an industry-wide way is apparently
beyond us as a species. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you watched the Silicon Valley show.
Yeah.
And there was that whole episode. That was brilliant. I mean, as I say to people, the reality TV show that is Silicon Valley. Yeah, no, exactly. And I think what you see from Go is that kind of emerged from Google culture, because part of Google culture is we have this mono repo where everyone's committing to the same enormous code base. And so you have to have the same style used everywhere. Because the linter is applied to everything. And so we just choose it. There's like we have this very annoying concept of readability at Google, where every time you submit some Java code, for example, it has to be approved not just by someone else, but someone with Java readability who'll make sure that you've written Java code that's easy to maintain and that's got tests and meets the style bar and so forth. So there's this whole bunch of things that people look at. And then once you've submitted enough code, you can get readability for yourself, and you don't need to get someone else approved. But there is this, they do enforce the monoculture. So if you're writing, everyone who writes Java at Google writes the same kind of Java, and it's the same for all the other languages as well. And it's it's one of my goals to get readability for at least one language. And right now I'm close to getting readability for SQL, which should tell you everything you need to know about being an SRE. And Go, nearly there for Go. But that's so we do enforce that, and that's why Go is like that. And it kind of emerged from that culture, which emerges from the way we've organized the tool chain. That kind of thing is like a process geek always fascinates me, how all that works and what the incentive structures are and so forth. But yeah, I think, it's something that people use as a way of like, I would say almost like othering different people. Is like creating tribes where they shouldn't exist necessarily and around the wrong things.
Oh, I think it's so tribal. A while ago when I was working on Webster Liberty, we applied formatting standards across the whole code base and enforced them in the CI. And the amount of conversations we had about it but could we make an exception for this little bit of the code base where I'd really like these standards? No, it only works if we all do it that way. And it fundamentally, it doesn't matter. And we talked about how you get these sort of trends that come and get applied in a really viral way, so the Dora metrics and the Google SRE book is another one, I think, where, you get sort of people who go, we've read the book, and then you ask them questions and then you realize that they haven't actually absorbed much of the book. They're just physically holding the book. And maybe that can be the next sort of tech trend that will come out of, yes, we've read the Google book on formatting. We're all in. We're a format shop.
Yeah, it's like one of a big list of things that if you do it at the beginning, it's super easy, and then if you don't do it at the beginning, it's a total nightmare. And I think so much of, I'm sure you deal with this as well, is like you're fixing things that should have been done right in the beginning, and just it's outrageously more expensive trying to standardize later.
I think I can probably answer why there's never going to be the Google format book, though, because I think with a lot of the other things, what makes them interesting is back to the incentive structures, isn't it? Of if I've read the Google SRE book, I might be able to get a job. And if I go and I put on my CV, I'm really good at not formatting code. It seems so trivial. It seems so obvious. And so then that means that we get away as an industry with being really terrible at it. Whereas the things that are hard, like microservices, like SRE, we're still terrible as an industry at them, but we put a lot of effort into continuing to be terrible at them in slightly different ways with a fancier vocabulary. Sorry, I've depressed you.
No, I think you just made my head explode. Let's focus on the right things, for God's sake. But, people, reading, all hard.
Yeah, so I think we should probably wrap up, but we need to say something nice and positive to wrap up with, because otherwise it's going to be depressing.
Yeah, it's really, I think, again, this is, if you spend time reading the news or on social media, it's so easy to catastrophize. I think, here's my thing. We're living in an era where we have these incredibly powerful tools. Tech tends, this is the problem with Silicon Valley, is that you take those tools and you use it to reinforce existing power structures. And, my hope is that we can find a way as an industry to use those tools to demolish some of those power structures. And, instead of disintermediating, people in order to, maximize corporate revenues, maybe we can find ways to use these tools to actually, help marginalize people and level the playing field a bit. So that's what I would like to see. I don't know how to do it.
And at least in the interim, at least we have continuous integration now in a way that we didn't 15 years ago.
I'll take your word for it.
It is so much better, it is. Well, thank you very much, Jez. It's been really great.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the GOTO podcast. Head over to gotopia.tech to discover lots more content from the brightest minds in software development.